Welcome to my review of the movie Hamilton: An American Musical. Hamilton first began being written in the year 2004 by a guy by the name of Lin-Manuel Miranda. He was inspired to write this musical after reading the biography titled Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow. Hamilton first premiered on Off-Broadway in January of 2015, and then later it moved to regular Broadway in August of the same year, where it was received with much critical fame and awards. Now, just a little bit of summarization about what exactly is Hamilton about. So, Hamilton was one of the founding fathers, but the thing is, he was much more obscure founding father when you compare him to the likes of Washington or Jefferson or Madison. When in reality, as Lin-Manuel Miranda tries to show through this musical, is Hamilton was actually quite important to the beginnings of our country. He helped in the Revolutionary War, and he wrote a good majority of the Federalist Papers. The play covers all of Hamilton's life. The very first song details his childhood, and then he moved to New York City to further his studies. And then from there, it shows how he gets involved in the Revolutionary War, how he rose to power there as he served under Washington, how he became a lawyer after the war, and then how he proceeded to get involved in politics. And then the latter half of the second act deals mostly with some of his poor decisions, which ultimately led to his downfall, both career and his death. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my favorite casting choices that they did, starting with the man himself, Lin-Manuel Miranda as Hamilton. Now, emotion-wise, he did a very good job of portraying sort of like the more refined aspects of the character of Hamilton. You can really see, how the people around him are affecting him, how his decisions are affecting his life. One critique that I do have is that vocal-wise, Miranda isn't the best singer. At least in the first run of shows that he did, which was like the 2015 to 2016 run of Hamilton. A lot of his vocals are sort of unrefined, and while in some aspects they can help give his character more of like a raw, down-to-earth sensation, in some of the more, let's say, like tender moments to where maybe he's interacting with his wife or he has a very serious conversation with Washington, some of his songs can come off as just a tiny bit scathing to the ear. Next, I'm going to talk about Leslie Odom Jr. and his portrayal of the character Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr was an incredibly important figure in Hamilton's life, being first a mentor figure, then a friend, and then eventually his political rival, who would ultimately be the one to kill him in their famous duel. Leslie Odom Jr.'s performance is, in my opinion, the vocal performance which carries this musical. So many of his songs are just so down to earth in their performance, and his vocals are really just quite beautiful. In his song Dear Theodosia, where he's essentially singing a love letter to his daughter. He is just so sweet and gentle in his words, and you can really tell that Odom Jr. put his heart and soul into his performance as Aaron Burr. The last major casting choice, which I'm going to be talking about, is Phillipa Soo as Eliza Schuyler. Now, Eliza Schuyler was Hamilton's wife, and in this portrayal of her character, you can really see how much of an impact Hamilton had on Eliza's life. In her first major song, where she is really singing about how she feels about Hamilton, she just describes it so eloquently as being floored by how he acts compared to some of the other soldiers, and just a refinement of his character. In later songs, after it comes out that Hamilton had cheated on her with Mariah Reynolds, the song titled Burn is sung by Eliza, and this is without a doubt the most emotionally charged song of the entire musical. She's just speaking right from the heart and saying how she wishes that she had never married Hamilton, and how essentially she wishes that he would burn for what he had done. Next, I'm going to really quickly talk about the cinematography and the choreography of this musical. Now, I never had the chance to actually go see the musical in person. I merely only watched the recording of it that they put onto Disney Plus. And some of the really cool things about this recording is that they actually filmed it across multiple shows. So where cameras out in front of the audience, like in the pit, they could really like move. We get the opportunity to move around a lot and to really capture all the different angles of what was happening. And they even actually filmed some parts of the show when there was no audience so that camera crew could actually be up right on stage and really get right up close to the actors so we can see what the emotion is showing on their face or the intensity of some of their choreography. And the choreography in this musical is really one of its strengths. I mean, you've got, classical ballroom dancing parts, and then others where it's all over the place and it's dancing, just the real fluidity of the motions, people jumping off of tables and doing flips. There's one portion of a song, the Battle of Yorktown, and some of the choreography includes, flipping rifles, almost like a color guard performance. And to me, that's really cool because not a lot of shows on Broadway have such interesting choreography as throwing around bayonets and flipping off of desks. And part of the reason why Hamilton, in my opinion, is such a good musical is because of the diversity in its choreography. So, what does Hamilton get right and what does Hamilton get wrong? For the most part, a lot of the details in the play are actually very historically accurate. Lin-Manuel Miranda and his team did a really great job of making sure that for the majority of it, they told the story as it was. All of the details of Hamilton's life are correct, and mostly where the play goes wrong is just a few minor historical inaccuracies or inconsistencies. Um, a big one, which I believe is mostly done just for dramatic effect, is in the song titled We Know, Jefferson, Madison, and Burr confront Hamilton about possible embezzlement of government funds. They bring check stubs which show how Hamilton had been paying off a man by the name of James Reynolds. And it's a long story, but basically, James Reynolds discovers this, and he tells Hamilton, go ahead, keep seeing my wife, but you need to pay me off, because I've got some debts that need to be taken care of, and this is an opportunity for me to get money. So the three men confront Hamilton about this, saying, oh, you're embezzling our government funds, we can ruin your career with this. And Hamilton comes forward and tells them, actually, no, I've just been cheating on my wife. In actuality, it was, I believe, a senator from Virginia, a House Speaker, and then I believe James Monroe who confronted Hamilton about this embezzlement. Um, Obviously, this is done for dramatic effect, having Jefferson, Madison, and Burr, who are lifelong co-workers of Hamilton, and Burr is one of his closest friends. Having these three men confront him about possible crime really just sets the tone of the play going forward, and that Hamilton is really on his own and he has no one else he can turn to, not even his closest friends or his wife. Another historical inaccuracy is that in the play, Hamilton says that he and John Laurens have written essays against slavery, and that he supports Lawrence's plan to one day lead an all-black battalion of soldiers into war. While historians have said that Hamilton did support Lawrence's idea, he never actually wrote any essays speaking out against slavery. There's even discussion about whether or not Hamilton himself owned slaves. There's no records or proof of this, but the Schuylers owned slaves, and it could be, inferred that maybe he received some from the Schuylers after marrying Eliza. There's no proof of this, so we don't really know whether or not he actually owned slaves. And obviously, this is done to portray Hamilton in a more heroic light. Many of the men of his time owned slaves, and having your protagonist of the play, if he owned slaves, that would definitely put a damper on the story you were trying to tell. Now I'm just going to be talking about some of my favorite aspects of the musical, and one of these is a lot of the subtlety which Miranda puts into some of the songs. So you've got the character Philip Hamilton. This is Alexander's son, he just wants to be like his dad. He wants to make his father proud. In one of the songs, he says, I shoulder his legacy with pride. Someday I'll blow them all away. And he just wants to make his father proud of him. That's all. So in one of the songs, a man disparages Hamilton in a public speech. And Philip hears this, and he recklessly challenges the man, who is named George Eaker. He challenges him to a duel, very recklessly and headstrong. And he does this because he wants to defend his father's legacy. And Hamilton, while he's proud of him for doing this, he's worried that Philip may have made the wrong decision, but he allows him to do the duel anyway. And this leads to Philip's death. In the song Stay Alive reprise, Philip is dying, and throughout a lot of the song, as we can hear here, there's a sort of heartbeat bass drum kick. And this is present through the majority of the song because this is Philip's heartbeat right here. And at the very end of the song, when Philip dies, you can hear the bass drum slowly start to decrescendo, and eventually there's no bass drum left. And Miranda does this to show that Philip is dead. There's no way to bring him back. And this is just a great musical and emotional cue to show this and to portray it to audiences. Another really subtle thing that I like is how Miranda writes Hamilton as opposed to Burr. So throughout the musical, we see that Hamilton is a very headstrong person. He's outspoken and he wants to get things done right away without really taking the time to think about it. And Burr, on the other hand, he's more reserved. One of the things which he says to Hamilton in the song Aaron Burr, Sir, is talk less, smile more. Basically, don't always speak your mind, but rather hear first and then form your thoughts. Hamilton always gets the last word in Edgewise, but then in the very last song, or one of the last songs where the two interact, is Your Obedient Servant, and this is basically telling the series of letters which led to Burr challenging Hamilton to the duel. As you can hear here,
I have the honor to be your obedient servant. A. Ham. A.
Burr got the last word in Edgewise, and Hamilton's words, they were followed by a very nice pizzicato string, very gentle and soothing to hear. Whereas Burr, his last words were followed up by a big brass flourish, indicating that Burr has the upper hand here this time. Hamilton's not going to come out on top the way he always has in the past. Another one of my favorite things that Miranda does with this musical is the musical motifs, which he uses to either signify, okay, here is where an important plot development is going to happen, or this is a change in what a character has been thinking by putting it in maybe a different key signature or changing it from a major to a minor key. The first one, and probably the most prominent one, is the song 10 Dual Commandments. This rhythm
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9
appears in a lot of different other songs, including Cabinet Battle 1, The World is Wide Enough, and Washington on Your Side. And this is a staircase melody, meaning it goes up in thirds. So you've got a tonal bass, and then you've got the first and the third, then it goes to the second and the fourth, etc., all the way up to a resolving of the chord. And that's a little bit of basic music theory for you. And this melody was actually inspired by a Notorious Big song titled The 10 Crack Commandments. But what Miranda does in the musical is he uses this to signify important moments in some characters' progression. One obvious part where he uses it, and I think this is probably the most emotionally important part where he uses it, is in the song Take a Break. You've got this instance right here, where Eliza is teaching Philip French, and he can't get the 7, 8, 9 right compared to how his mother is doing it. She continues to go up in the chord while Philip goes down in the chord. And this is done to show how Philip is a deviation from his mother and how he can't just quite get it right. Now, the important thing to note is later on in the duel between Philip and George Eaker, as we see here,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7
Philip does not live past 7, 8, 9. And symbolically, Miranda uses this to show he could just never quite get it right. He could never truly live up to what maybe his father's expectations of him were, or he could never live up to that Hamilton legacy which his father is setting before him. And this is done to emotionally charge the play just a little bit more. Another musical motif which I really like is the Yorktown motif, as we hear right here. This musical intro in the Battle of Yorktown sets the precedent for the rest of the song. This song is by far my favorite in the musical, just because of how high octane energy it is, the action that it has, the choreography with the bayonets. That's the song where it's located. And this song is the beginning of Hamilton's success. This is where he becomes that Revolutionary War hero he always wanted to be. This is how he makes the impact on Washington, who later asks him to be his Secretary of Treasury. That same instrumental motif appears later on in the song Hurricane, as we can hear here. And Hurricane is the song where Hamilton is at his lowest point. Quite a contrast to the Battle of Yorktown, where that is his best point in life. He is down on his own. He has no one he can turn to. He's got Burr threatening to expose his cheating on his wife. His wife doesn't trust him at all. His political career is going down the drain. And the one thing he turns to is writing as a way to escape these problems, where he then writes the Reynolds pamphlet, which is basically a public expose he wrote about himself saying, "Hey guys, I know I've been accused of embezzlement. Don't worry, I only cheated on my wife. It's not that big a deal." And that's the beginning of the end for him. This is where his wife wishes he would burn. His political career goes in shambles after that, and he doesn't make a return until the song Election of 1800, where he endorses Jefferson over Burr in the election, and then that's where Burr gets mad at him and then challenges him to a duel. Then Hamilton dies. And those two musical motifs, the 10 Duel Commandments one and the Yorktown one, those are just two of my favorite ways that Miranda writes the music in a way to signify, a change in tone or a change in character development. The last thing I'm going to be talking about, which I really enjoy about this play, is the allusions that it makes to the Shakespeare play, Macbeth. In the song titled Take a Break, Hamilton writes a letter to his sister-in-law, Angelica, where he says, "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day." And that right there is an allusion to Macbeth. In this letter, he then goes on to compare himself to Macbeth, saying that people in his life are like the characters in Macbeth. He says, "Madison is Banquo, Jefferson's Macduff, and Birnam Woods is Congress on its way to Dunsinane." Basically saying, I've got all these forces in my life that are trying to oppose me. I've got Congress trying to slowly take me down, and then I've got Jefferson, who is actively trying to go against me by going behind my back to Washington and going against some of these policies that I'm trying to enact. And this is really cool. Another allusion which the musical makes to Macbeth is in the song The Reynolds Pamphlet. Angelica comes to confront Hamilton about what he's done to Eliza, saying, "You will never be satisfied. God, I hope you're satisfied." And I can't remember the exact character who says it. It's either Macbeth to Lady Macbeth or Lady Macbeth saying it to Hamilton, but something along to the effects of, "You will never be satisfied with how much power you get." And I didn't actually catch that allusion in my listening of this play, of listening to the musical soundtrack. I only caught it after we actually studied Macbeth in class, which I thought was pretty cool. Those are just a couple of allusions which Hamilton makes to Macbeth. There are lots of others that can be found sprinkled throughout the play. So yeah, that's pretty much all my review. I know this has already gone on pretty long. There's just so many awesome things that I can talk about Hamilton. I just love it. I love the soundtrack. I love the choreography of it. I love the story that it tells. I always thought it was really interesting that, if there was ever to be a musical about a founding father, sure, why not Alexander Hamilton, the obscure one who wrote some Federalist Papers and is on the $10 bill? I just think it's really cool how Miranda portrayed his story. In an interview, he said that this is a story told of America then, told by America now, and you can see that that's obviously very clear in his casting of all non-white actors except my main man, King George III, played by Jonathan Groff, aka Kristoff from Frozen, and I just think that's absolutely hilarious. So yeah, in total, what would I rate this movie? Probably like an 8 out of 10. I'm sure if I had ever seen it in, live production, I would give it a higher rating, but at least the filmed version that they put on Disney Plus, you can't really capture the magic of live theater by putting it on TV. So yeah, I'd give it an 8 out of 10 because, like Philip Schuyler, it could not make it all the way to 10.